Law of success, failure. My friends, we reached 6 times now that we have talked about Napoleon Hill's 6 of his 7 temporary defeats. And he says it is at this number, my friends, that may be the most critical of all of the numbers, because he says, I reached so many temporary defeats that most men, it either takes them higher or they quit and they go lower. In other words, my friends, he says, if you analyze all 6 of these temporary defeats, he says alone, or if you study them individually, they mean nothing. But he says, if you study them together, you start to see a pattern that lifts me. And he says, one such thing is that you may have noticed that in all of the 6 that I've done so far, he says, I have not reached my personal definite chief aim. In other words, I was not engaged in a work that was my life's calling. He says, I don't know if you picked up on that, but he says, when you notice that, you will start to see one of the reasons. He also says this, unfortunate is the person who has never had the thrill of being penniless at one time or another. For as Edward Bach points out and truthfully states, poverty is the richest experience that can come to man. But he says, I recommend you get away from it as quickly as possible. My friends, at this point, he starts an advertising agency in the Midwest. And he says, I again started to make money. And he says, but then something hit again, another temporary defeat. The second draft in the World War happened. And he says, I lost students from all around the world in numerous countries. And he says, tuition numbers went down $75,000. Now keep in mind that high number at what time this was. And he says, so I was again faced with temporary defeat. But this was the turning point that I figured out what my definite chief aim was and what that had to do with this temporary defeat as you wrap them all together. My friends, in our next video, we will touch on that definite chief aim and what happened with his 7th failure.